to another episode of the OTT Red Spotlight podcast. This morning, I'm lucky enough to be with two experts when it comes to Sports 2.0, as we might call it. Kjetil Horneland, the CEO of EaseLive, and Max Signorelli from On Media are going to be speaking to me about the complexion of what this topic represents, where it's come from, and where it might be going. Welcome to the OTT Red Spotlight podcast here live at IBC 2024 at the Bedrock streaming stand. How's things? We're on day 3 now of the show. You guys are still looking fresh and healthy. Congratulations.
The cogs are starting to wear out a bit, but we're getting there.
You're looking fresh, Max.
Oh, well, you're too kind.
How's it been for you, Kjetil?
It's been great. Fantastic.
Good.
So, always great to meet so many great people in the industry, right? And to get a feel for what's going on. So,
amazing opportunity. You know, I think there are these events around the world, NAB, CABSAT, this one. I feel like they're the heartbeat of the industry. You know, everyone's on LinkedIn and you've got hundreds of people now in my group, the OTT Red WhatsApp group, and on the app. We're all in touch with each other. It's kind of the digital, never-ending exhibition, but you can't beat the face-to-face interaction. You know,
it's true. You know, it's lovely with all the video meetings, but you do need to, meet people face-to-face.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for me, it reminds me how short I am. Actually, I constantly meet people and think, wow, where are they breeding these broadcast guys?
We're doing analyst briefings, and you're sort of stood between people's shoulders, and you're going, oh dear, I'm sort of wedged in here.
Absolutely. Guys, for people who don't know you as well as I do, share the organisations that you work for and what you do at those organisations. You want to start us off, Kjetil?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I run EaseLive. EaseLive is a company that does interactive graphics for live sports mainly. So we work across, everything from basketball to baseball and ice hockey and football and everything. And we're basically building a system that allows us to interact with end users on top of the video stream. So picture you're basically having an application layer that is relevant to what you are watching, and you can go much deeper into the TV content itself.
I've got my naive face on as if I don't know what you're speaking about, but I know your proposition pretty well because you've been on the podcast before, and it's amazing. I'm looking forward to getting into that. Max, this is the first time we've met each other, at least face-to-face. I think people in the industry will definitely know your brand, but maybe if anybody doesn't know On Media, give us a familiarity with who you are and what you do.
Sure, yeah. So basically my job is to keep tabs on you guys, along with everyone else in this hall and all the other halls as well. So yeah, Omdia is a global research company covering a huge variety of topics, but my area is media entertainment. And so I'm the consumer research lead within the media entertainment research team, looking at how people are using video services, what kind of devices they're using it on, the technology behind some of these things, and content specifically as well. So TV, movie, sports, the lot.
I'm going to really enjoy this. I mean, we've got a topic. Everyone loves sports, right? When it comes to the context or lens that you look through within our sector at what sports represents, it's probably the most lucrative, you'd be able to quantify that, Max, dimension of this landscape that we exist on. And actually, I find it all super, super interesting as well in terms of the interactivity. But let's talk about the transformation of live sports streaming, because there's a whole massive depth of transformation that's happened that brings the viewer or the person interacting with that sport, wherever they are, on whatever device, to the point that you've just made, closer to the action in a way that's never been realised before. And you're one of the kind of frontier organisations doing that, and partnering with Bedrock recently for the Euros to do so.
Did. Yeah. So I think, one of the big things happening is really, if you think about TV content itself, even though we got all these streaming services now and so much content, the content itself didn't really change that much, right? And you have, the internet where everything is clickable and you can go into any type of content. So we want to bring that to the experience for the fan, because they're craving so much more information, but we would like them to go deeper into the content, while they're watching the stream. So we can kind of give them more of what they're looking for, give them more to engage with, so they go deep into their, their favorite players, their favorite teams, and they can interact with the content itself. So in many ways, content is not only the one distribution to everybody; it's everybody's personalized stream, everybody's personalized choices, what they really care about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's really, when you do that, you see some of the engagement rates has a massive impact on your streaming service, and that's kind of one of the key things, because everybody's invested so heavily in their OTT. So they really need to make sure they can grow those viewing durations and that they can, use that foundation to then monetize on top of it, right?
Yeah.
So it's the whole picture. But as we get more and more streaming services, you probably have 10 of them yourself, right? Which ones are the ones?
Absolutely, yeah.
Which ones are the ones that are properly premium to you, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's what we're trying to do.
I like the fact that we've got both of you at the table, because as the chief executive of one of the frontier organisations pushing this type of technology forward, you're able to speak about it with a very intimate lens. You know what the whole sales life cycle is like, you know what the technology is like, the development of the tech, the implementation of the tech, and then the output. You see it from a very macro perspective. How does the transformation look from a wider perspective on this kind of sports and interaction horizon?
So it's like you're saying, right? This idea of increased interaction, increased time with platform, increased revenue. But those revenue sources are increasingly diverse as well. It's not just as simple as saying, here's a ticket for a sports show, off you go kind of thing. Nowadays, there's so many more things that you can do, and increasingly so many more things that people expect, because they're doing so much on so many devices, sometimes at the same time as they're watching this sports stuff. Especially younger demographic groups. They are the generation where we have some stats saying about 75% of them are typically, while watching TV, using their phone at the same time to send messages, to play video games, even to watch other video content while also watching TV. So you've got this multi-stream angle you can do, but that is a really significant opportunity, because if you capture the engagement on all of those streams at the same time, you're creating this really engaged consumer, and as a result, they are more likely to consume the content that you're putting out there, be that the video content itself, the events that happen around it, or just connecting with the other fans, especially in sport. Sport's such a tribal group kind of activity, right? It's so important to keep that connection and maintain that connection while the event is going on, and even before and after it too.
Football is so often used as the spine of conversations like this, because everyone knows football, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of football. I'm a Formula One fan.
Yes.
And I know that I build my own ecosystem of interaction when I watch Formula One by sitting there watching Sky on the big screen, but I've got my app, the Formula One app, and I listen to the commentary on the app, and I choose which in-car communication with the pit lane I listen to. And I love it, the whole texture of what that means. So when I listen to you guys speak, that's what I'm thinking of. But you just mentioned something, Max, that I would like to kind of stick on, because, although as a 45-year-old guy, I built my own little ecosystem for interacting there. You mentioned demographics, different devices, etc. Do you see that? Have you got anything tangible around what different demographics are utilising and the extent to which they're utilising different platforms and devices?
Yeah, I think one of the key ones that certainly we talk about all the time and is very holistically relevant to the industry is this high usage of social media services. We're talking things like TikTok and Instagram, and even things like YouTube. And interesting the way you word it there, this sort of curating your own experience. Because at the end of the day, that's what everyone's doing, but the way they're curating it is typically through social media. And so that's why there's so much attention on those platforms, is because that's where a lot of the eyeballs are going. Yeah. But again, that's not necessarily the end all. And again, it's not just the younger demographics doing that. There's still a decent number of TikTok users who are over 35.
My son watches all of the sports that he consumes on TikTok.
Right.
He loves boxing and mountain biking.
Right, yeah.
That's what he watches on TikTok.
Exactly, yeah. So these platforms are really powerful, but they can be leveraged by most people. You just have to, I guess, talk to the right person and put the content in the right place at the right time, typically as well, and hit those points where the consumers want it.
Shutter, when it comes to interactive features, I've kind of talked about my very amateur constellation of interaction that I build for myself, but you'll know this quite forensically, at a more granular level, and I'm sure you've probably played with which features work better. And what's your take on it?
Yeah. It's a good question. So I think your example is a good one, because what we're seeing is that you have kind of the main feed, the main production, but you have so many things surrounding that production, right? Like the in-car feeds, like the additional commentary, like the additional whatever content around the driver, their speed, whatever that is, right? So all this is data that's used in the broadcast itself to produce the broadcast But what we're doing is to take that data and give it to the end user, basically, so they can interact with that content. So you're kind of sitting there with like a sandwich of many, many layers of content. And then you can obviously measure exactly what are the users using in each sport. Some sports are really fast-paced, some sports are slower. So you can kind of figure out what's a great experience for you, what's a great viewing experience. So a few examples is obviously a lot of the sports will have a lot of metadata, like the instant stuff that happens. There was a goal, there was a red card. So we know exactly when that's happening. And we're kind of sitting on that data. We know what's going to happen in the stream before it happens in the stream, right? So we're getting the data instantly from the venue, and then basically you're waiting for the video to give you that live moment where we can engage you with something. So live stats is often the foundation to kind of follow the pace of the game. But then everything else can be added on top. So some of the very engaging stuff is really when it's easy to participate. If you show up like a quiz and a poll and saying, oh, did he deserve that red card? What did you think about, the referee, right? Yeah. All of that type of stuff is quite engaging. And across customers, you'll see engagement rates, maybe 67% of the audience choosing to respond to that question when you post it. So obviously that's stuff you can automate.
So really, I feel like that's a really high percentage.
It is, yeah. So maybe an average of kind of frequent usage of interactivity, across sports would be in the 30-40% range of the entire audience watching the stream, which is also quite high. Yeah. But you get these peaks that are even higher, like the quizzes and polls activities. Yeah. And then you get kind of the constant usage of diving in and finding the stuff on your favorite football player and so on. Yeah.
What about live chats? This is something that I find always comes up as a part of the complexion of this discussion and interacting. I remember when in lockdown, when my kids were watching not sports but stuff on platforms that allowed them to chat to their friends while they were watching stuff on Netflix. Is that still as prominent in terms of the value ecosystem that's created?
I would say it's probably not on the top of the list in terms of what customers are asking for. You have so many sources of chats, and people will kind of do that in many directions. That also brings about kind of the need to moderate it. So, there are providers of chat systems out there that you can kind of integrate, but it's not been the top of the list of what the customers are asking for, basically. Yeah. So I think it kind of has more to do with, if you can make a lot of content available, it becomes interesting. What's probably more interesting is if you could share some of that content with your friends, right? So there are aspects like that, like when we've done, say, watch parties with celebrities and those kind of things that bring you a unique additional layer to what you're watching.
Unpack that for me, Kjetil. What is a watch party with a celebrity?
So that's interesting, right? If you're watching your favorite game, instead of listening to the main commentator, maybe you can get, a celebrity that is known within this sport, like a former player or somebody, right, who comes on the stream, and you can talk to that person, right? So if that person now becomes the commentator, and you and your friends have joined that stream, and you're following what he's saying, maybe you get to interact and ask some questions. That's a cool example of extending the
opportunity to monetize something like that is huge.
Yeah.
As an entrepreneur, I'm sitting here thinking I need to get into that. We talk afterwards. Yeah. What about, Max, do you see oscillations and movement in, we're talking about watch parties, maybe live chat, although still relevant, might be, feels amazing to say this considering the short period of time it's been in existence, but, live chats maybe becoming slightly antiquated. Do you see the emergence of these things and then the drop-off as other forms of interactivity emerge?
Yeah, well, again, it's one of those things that at the moment is probably being facilitated by other platforms. So again, I'm raving on about social media, but I think just to tag onto the point there, it's really important to mention that a lot of the discourse and messaging around sports events happens on social media. Yep. It's almost what X, formerly Twitter, is known for, almost, as being the place where people put that kind of thing on. And that's where they put clips, that's where they put their opinions, their reactions to red cards, very live but very quickly engageable things. The difference, I think, is becoming, we want to take that either there or bring it into one's own domain and couple it with other experiences that you can't do on those kind of platforms or can't do as readily or, as you say, in such a controlled way. Because, again, these social platforms are moderated, obviously, but not quite to the extent you might want them to be given the circumstances. So if you want to create that environment, which is something that you might want to tailor specifically for the sport, or if you are getting the ex-player or celebrity in to be the commentator, someone that people you think would resonate with them, you have to sort of tailor that environment. And that's not saying you have to sort of clean wash the whole room, but you have to create something that's engaging and resonates with those users, because at the end of the day, if you are trying to then charge them for it in some way, you have to do it right, because otherwise they're just not going to pay for it.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned something there around alternative and complementary platforms, and kind of leads me nicely on to talking about AI and data analytics. And I remember a conversation a couple of years ago with a guy called Peter Van Dam. I'm not sure if you know Peter, but particularly in Saudi, Peter, where sports emergence has been extremely strong over the course of the last few years. Speaking to Peter at the Broadcast Pro Middle East forum, and him talking to me about how quickly AI processes a game to create the montage at the end of the game, to create clips that can immediately be pushed out to social media. Now, what's your take on AI and data analysis, how quickly it happens and the value it brings? How have you used that, Shetel?
Yeah, so if you think about like all the data you can consume in connection with the game, what if we could do the same with video, right? So if you care about a certain player and you're kind of halfway into the game, if you instantly have all the video kind of moments available to you, that's something we worked a bit on. Where cutting that automatically, there's obviously highlights companies to do that, but there's also some production time associated with that, right? So what we can do in this case is to say, well, you know what, we don't need to necessarily always cut it, but we need to assemble it in a way that you get your meaningful story.
Yes.
So what if we can do that without cutting anything, right? And just jumping in time for the places and the moments of the game you just saw, you can do it instantly, basically. And that is a good example of the data being the markers of what was interesting in the game, but then also understanding what would you consume or would I consume, right? And based on your choices and my choices, we could get different kind of combinations of the video kind of becoming something you can control, right?
Max, do you see anything from a wider perspective, either regionally, globally?
Yeah, I mean, we can go on and on about AI. I mean, I've been seeing a couple of things, even at this show, about really good use cases within sports specifically. And again, a lot of it is personalization, this idea that if you perhaps came into a stream late, so you missed the first half an hour of a game and you want to catch up, you don't want to have to sort of rewind and try and find the pieces, you can just have the AI do it for you, kind of thing. And that's a really interesting personalization format where you can have certain things tailored towards you. And again, that's just regarding the video clips. Otherwise, another way of thinking about it I've seen as well is this idea of this, the rising tide floats all boats kind of thing, where something like football doesn't really need much enhancement in the way it's filmed or delivered. Obviously, there's lots you can do, but sports that may not be as popular or have such a platform is something where they can really help just in things like video processing, but obviously as well in things like personalization to, again, really hit those peaks. Because at the end of the day, people are going to remember those engagement peaks as opposed to the generic full 80 minutes or whatever it is of the game, right? So you want to hit those peaks hard.
You know, what you're saying there resonates with me so much. If I think of a sports experience, for me, I want to watch the build up to it. I want to watch the whole thing on my sofa or in a bar with my buddies, probably on a big landscape screen. You know, I want to have a few beers afterwards and watch the interviews. My son watches it virtually with all of his friends in portrait in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
In and out.
He's 14, absolutely.
One and done, yeah.
You know, it's the swipe generation, right? So your point actually, Shetel, around a rewarding consumption experience for me is totally different to my son. You know,
Well, it's a good point, right? Because there's an opportunity to create a community on your broadcast, right? Whereas the social media already kind of have the community. So an interesting question in that mix is really, yes, you're consuming the main game, but how much else could we allow you to consume in 24 hours, right? And which is typically a use case for highlights and distributing that again on social media and other places. But, you know, it's kind of like one of these things we've been used to watching TV like we always have in the past. But now you have so many opportunities. So the question is really, how do you assemble that in a meaningful way?
Yeah, absolutely. Shifting focus slightly, you know, you see more and more D2C strategies being adopted by sports franchises. And that interests me because, to be honest, as a commercially minded individual, if I owned a team, I'd want to do that. But then again, I've got more intimacy with, you know, this sector and all of the monetization opportunities that exist. What's your take on it, guys? You know, do you see the typical broadcasters gravitating more towards embracing the type of technology that facilitates interaction, or where sports franchises are taking this kind of thing on board? Are they more receptive to this kind of technology because they're doing it to monetize beyond what they might have done previously?
So so I got one interesting example there from La Liga, where we collaborate with a company called Play Anywhere, where basically they've defined a new rights category called interactive rights. So it's an interesting example. So it's nominated for the Innovation Awards for IBC.
Okay.
So it's quite interesting that if you define that on a league level and you distribute it to the broadcasters, you got an ecosystem, right? On top of the existing rights distribution.
Yeah.
So in many ways, if you have a D2C strategy or not, is really often a money question, or it is a kind of an infrastructure for the future question. So many leagues, you see them building up and having that opportunity, but then it's a money question if they sell a content right at a high enough price in the country or go directly themselves, right? So it varies a bit. Like if you look at the US market, there's a lot more kind of D2C stuff happening there.
Yeah.
But a different structure with regional sports networks, and then you have international rights and so on, right?
Yeah.
So it's a complex picture, but certainly I think it's valuable to have that ability to go D2C in the markets that make sense for doing that, right? And you're kind of seeing more and more of that, I think.
Massive difference, geographically, definitely North America's size, scale, take up and loyalty to certain sports. Anything to add to that in terms of what you see maybe in some of the more nuanced tier 2, tier 3 or specialists sports?
Yeah, well, again, like you say, it really depends on the sport and it depends on the country, because you're going to find certain things just don't resonate the same way in certain markets, despite you thinking a global D2C strategy will make us the most money. It doesn't always work out that way. And while I feel like it's important to have the D2C avenue, there's still plenty to be said for doing stuff through partnerships, through broadcasting platforms, pay TV services, whatever that may be, because then you can again facilitate and find that audience who, in addition to that, may also be that group that's more willing to pay for that content as well, and therefore more able to be monetized. And that's always what they've done quite well, I find, when you go through these partners. And then there's also certain obligations. So, for example, if maybe it's a bit too global an example, but if England are playing a football game, then that has to be shown on a broadcasting channel in the UK, because otherwise people are going to go, where's my British team, where are they playing, kind of thing. So there are certain elements of that where you also have to consider that some things have to go in these places, and you don't want to lose the consumer by doing that. You just have to move that engagement to there and then keep it going on afterwards.
That's interesting, because if you think about that accountability to embrace what the PSBs represent in kind of national sports, when the expectation of the consumer might become a de facto expectation over the next few years on being able to interact in a certain way, you might be best to answer this, Kjetil. Do you see a different type of appetite with the PSBs to implement this type of technology in comparison to maybe some of the more nimble, dynamic, more commercially orientated routes to market?
Yeah, I think there's always a combination, and I think well, you can take a few examples from some of the American leagues that have kind of been quite leaning in kind of adopting things early, and that kind of, if you look at the value chain from the starting point and all the way down to the end user and anybody who is in between, there's different degrees of maturity in terms of how quick they are to adopt something new, right? If it is a D2C or it's interactivity or it's new monetization on top or even betting, right? So this I think there's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all for the question, but really having if you have a lot of opportunities strategic-wise, then you have a lot of options open, right? And it'll be interesting to see how it goes, I think.
I guess it's such an unfolding story, it's unfolding so quickly with so much opportunity that it's hard to calibrate, and globally.
Yeah.
It's hard to kind of calibrate, kind of question I just asked you. Finally, guys, there's so much exciting stuff happening now that it's kind of hard to think beyond that and think, well, where's this going to be in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? But I'm going to ask you anyway. What are your thoughts, as people that are intimate with this and live in this world of sports and interaction and technology on a daily basis? What are the pie in the sky things that you think we should expect or look out for in terms of developments and milestones over the next few years? Kjetil?
It's a good question. If you look at kind of the basics of like, how do humans work, right? If you're reading the newspaper 20 years ago, or if you're leaning back on your sofa watching a big screen TV today, you're kind of covering the same need. So you have the need to relax and kind of enjoy something and just feed me, but you also have the need to lean forward into something and enjoy that more and go deeper. So you kind of see these modes of consuming content and then consuming that wherever you can get it easily. So a very simple principle is that if we design a great experience that kind of gives you more in return than the effort you spent trying to figure it out, then that's the definition of a great user experience, right? And it's as simple as that. So if you can really understand how you do that and you keep the barriers really low, then that's super important. And if you then look a couple of years ahead, you got like a linear, like exponential growth of all these technologies coming together. So if it's AI or it's more automation or it's a faster cloud or whatever it is, it kind of leads to just the generation of content being like enormous, right? So what's going to need to happen then is that how do we translate all of that abundance of content in a meaningful way for you as a user? And if you don't do that properly, then you're kind of getting lost in all this stuff, right? So there's obviously, as you know, there's a term called the attention economy. You only have so much attention, and kind of how do you do that in a good way?
I thought that was an amazing question, but your response to that makes me feel as though you've either said that a million times on panels before, it was so philosophical that people will be thinking Chris must have given him that question before the interview, but very philosophical, great response to that. Max, what's your take? Wrap us up.
Yeah, I'd like to tag on to the end of that because, again, I don't know how far or how visionary you want to be of this, but it's a similar thing. There's an attention economy. There's also the fact that there's only 24 hours in a day and you spend about 8 of them sleeping, hopefully. So viewing time is not something that can just infinitely increase. There is a level where you can't get them to watch anymore. What you can do is engage them further within that time and make them have a more enjoyable experience and bring more people together in more places and really create something nice there. The other thing is, this technology is going to just keep on going. And if you go really far into the future, or maybe not as far as you might think, you're looking at effectively what could be called a post-app world. It's something I've mentioned before, this idea that soon you'll get your phone out and you won't tap an app. You'll ask it to do something for you and it will just go, I'm going to go and grab that from there and that from there. I'll call this cab for you, I'll order this pizza and I'll turn your thermostat on when you get home. And then I'll put the football match on when you get home kind of thing. And it's like, is that really how far this can go? And the answer is, yeah, it can do. Yeah. Just depends who's going to put this together and in what combination that needs to go in. And then when you're sat there, what really are you doing and what's being monetized there? So again, focusing on this idea of personalization, keeping people interested and creating these unique, interesting experiences that people actually want.
So as we reach the border with the next podcast that I'm going to seek to do with you guys, the post-app world, we should probably wrap this one up. Max Sonorelli from Media, Kjetil Hornjan from Ease Life. It's been a pleasure doing this podcast with you. I hope you enjoy the rest of IBC, and I hope that it's been as enjoyable for you as it has been for me, having you on the Bedrock streaming stand for the OTT Red Spotlight podcast.
Thanks for having us, Biz.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you.